Well, welcome everybody to Behind the Capital Curtain. As you well know, this is pulling back layers of complexity in the world of business and commercial real estate deals to reveal what really drives top-tier investment opportunities. Hosted by me, Dave Cotter. The show explores the art and science behind investing in exceptional businesses and commercial real estate deals. Each episode is a deep dive into the structures, strategies, and secrets that make standout investments successful. Whether it's breaking down the anatomy of a $50 million industrial acquisition, decoding waterfall equity structures, or uncovering how to identify off-market gems, this podcast is your backstage pass of how sophisticated capital really works. I'm super excited to have with me here today Patrick Vanden Bossche. And so welcome to the show, Patrick.
Thank you so much, Dave. Pleasure to be here.
And so Patrick, I'm going to give a little background. So you immigrated from the Netherlands as a teenager. Yep. Patrick is a natural when it comes to leading and motivating people, a gift which has helped chart the course of his very successful and diverse career. An entrepreneur at the core, Patrick has led and operated a variety of fast growth, startup, and next growth companies, including Barrett-Jackson, ModTech, and TPC, among others, spanning across industries, including manufacturing, goods, and services. Today, he is putting those leadership skills to good use as the President of Realty Executives International. Right there. Big shout out, one of the largest real estate franchise organizations worldwide, a lifelong pursuer of learning and knowledge. Patrick's credentials include State of California Polytechnic University of Sonoma School of Architecture, Six Sigma, Lean Training, Lead Training, and the Toyota Production System Training. He is a longtime member of the International Young Presidents Organization, YPO, including leadership roles as the chairman of the board. Awesome to have you here. A lot to offer, and so thank you again.
Oh my goodness, the honor's all mine.
So I'm just going to dive into some questions as we start off. So you've scaled companies across like wildly different industries, from manufacturing to luxury, auctions to real estate. So like, what would you say is the common thread you look for before betting your time and energy on a business?
Yeah, so great question. I was reflecting on this question a bit in preparation for this meeting, and there's a lot of things that go, as you know this from being in business, the due diligence process and kind of the whole analysis. But I really distill it down. This is going to sound a little bit counterintuitive, but it's a little bit of kind of comparing it to your gut to a certain extent. And I say that because a lot of the industries that I've been in, let me back up, the companies that I've led are really cottage industries and are involved, they're cottage within industries, and they tend to basically, part of the opportunities that they're fragmented. So I tend to gravitate toward industries and businesses that meet that criteria. So don't get me wrong, there's some fantastic Fortune 1000 companies out there. They're big, but I would argue that in some ways, that as much as they push the billion-dollar, trillion-dollar numbers, as a percentage, they kind of start kind of nudging up against the ceiling. And I kind of like the idea of being in these niche industries that tend to be more agile and nimble. So even though they might be niche and cottage by nature, that if they stay in their own lane or stay in the existing lane, they might not see a lot of growth. But if they're able to maneuver through, they can see very much exponential growth. And often, look, I mean, to this day, still small business is a big sector of who we are in the United States. And we continue seeing that the sum of those parts, often they've been the ones that have really survived. And so but for me, it's really looking for that. And I'll tell you, it comes down to, for me, when I really think through it, it's people. It is people. Wow. I mean, it's people, it's management team, it's people. Again, I know AI is here has come and it's here to stay.
Sure.
I think it's amazing. But at the end of the day, it's people that are making choices on goods and services. It's people that are working within companies, buying those goods and services, by the way. So really understanding people, having good people skills, I think that's super important. It's something I look for.
They always say people, capital, strategy, execution, but none of it happens without people. So couldn't agree more. And, on that same vein, every successful company, there's usually like a brutal moment that nobody talks about. And so like, what's the biggest, oh crap moment in your career, and how did you pull out of it? Because we've all had those moments in time.
I've had too many to count. And I tell you, it's, but first of all, some would say, well, let me start off with the biggest misnomer out there is this thing called overnight success. It does not exist. So that's probably one of the biggest fables out there. It might be, you might say, oh my goodness, yeah, I started this company a year ago and here we are and we're just super successful. And I go, but yet to get to that point, there's probably a whole bunch of failures. So I would say I've had a whole bunch of those oh crap moments because you don't know what you don't know, especially being, if you're entrepreneurially minded, you tend to drift into areas that are areas of opportunity. It's generally, in most cases, things haven't been thought of, solutions haven't been arrived at. So as a result of that, I get more worried about that if things are going too well, I go, maybe I'm in the wrong lane here. So, but in answer to your question, I think there are a number that I would share. One is Bear Jackson. I'll tell you, one of the oh crap moments was we were, I'd been building the company, scaled to family-owned business. We had come in with private equity money and it had built a nice, strong brand here locally that people knew about. It'd come to Scottsdale. And so we had started broadening it into other markets. Well, one of those markets was Las Vegas. And so it was a very complex journey. Long story short, the week that we were doing a 4-day collector car auction, we were doing it at the Mandalay Bay. Literally the day that we were opening up was during the Great Recession, and literally was the day that the markets were in a free fall. And so, how do you plan for that? The good news was, what we found out is when these calamities happen, the places that people go in these moments of need, they kind of get back to the grassroots, right? We saw this during COVID. People going to movies. Churches were filling up. And what we provided, besides the fact that we had a great business offering a system that allowed you to transaction on collected cars, we also were the keeper or the steward of memories, days gone by, right? 50s, 60s. So there was a lot of provenance. And people, when all of a sudden they didn't know what to do, they were coming to the auction. Even if they were buying cars, they were there just to remember when times were more innocent. So that's an example. And the other one I would say is, and this is probably going to be a theme that I'll bring up during this conversation probably multiple times. No one tells you, everyone tells grow, everyone tells you to get good lines of credit, but no one tells you that growth needs a lot of capital. And I will tell you that no matter as good as one might be with numbers, and I consider myself pretty decent, trust me, one, I will tell you, I've never executed on a plan A. I started with a plan A, but I don't know, it usually is plan C, D, E, would name it. The other thing is whatever I had budgeted or what I think our capital needs were, I was always underestimating it. I'm going to tell you the times that I went, oh my goodness, we're going to run out of cash, even though we had a great book of business. Yeah. Because here's the thing, I'll say this and then I'll let you ask the next question, which is no one tells you that banks are in the business of asset lending. When you're growing, you're building assets that aren't here yet. And so they're not in the business that growth scares banks. Let me just be clear about that. It scares banks.
Terrifies banks. Yeah. I've had many, many situations where it's like, wow, you really do need more cash than you think. Henceforth, cash is one of the major things that businesses go out of business. So I guess in your view, what's the most misunderstood metric or KPI, either in real estate or manufacturing, that people really should pay attention to? Because there's many times, even in my own businesses, that it's been vanity metrics where we're focusing on the wrong things. So do you have one thing or two that you said these really matter most when it comes to what you've seen?
Yeah, I would start probably when I answer that question two ways or two elements to it. One is, you mentioned, thank you for reading my bio. Sometimes when I hear my bio, I go, my goodness, I didn't know I did all those things. And by the way, that just is a reflection of a journey. By no means are they a reflection of what I've achieved, but it's a journey. But in that, you talk about Six Sigma. So I'm big on lean. And I say that because one of the misunderstood metric is efficiency and secondary and thirsty uses. That's human capital. That means capital. That means, I'm going to call it inventory. And I think people often they don't measure that properly. I had to learn this at a very young age because inventory, there's a Japanese term in Kaizen, which is part of TPS and ultimately Six Sigma, and that's called muda. Muda means waste. Inventory is considered waste. And so one of the things that I would say is, often we think of inventory, things on the shelf, but I would say inventory includes cash. I think inventory includes people. I think inventory includes brick and mortar. Inventory obviously includes the things that do go on the shelf or in manufacturing things that you have for raw material. And I think people end up measuring or using KPIs that might only take a slice of that and not holistically. And so that would be my.
Yeah, it's good. And so if somebody came to you and they dropped 50 million bucks in your lap today, whether you're going in real estate or manufacturing, where would you go today? Like, what would you dump $50 million into in this environment? And like, why would you even do it?
Yeah, so short answer is real estate, not only because I run Realty Executives.
Sure. Yeah.
But real estate. So here's the thing. And look, we have a housing shortage. I mean, if you cut through all the noise of interest rates and economy that might be, I was reading Jamie Dimon's report this morning where he thinks that there's going to be this pretty big kind of off the cliff. And maybe that happens. I don't know. But here's the thing. Fundamentally, people need roof over their head. And we see this problem existing in a number of different ways. We saw this big swell of multifamily as people are looking just places to live, so they're renting units. The house prices increasing. We see baby boomers that are really starting to age out. It's affectionately called the silver tsunami. I think those are all things, by the way, that COVID kind of delayed, but it's all happening. This transference of wealth. But here's the other thing. It's one thing that is a common denominator more than anything else. Like, you think about anything, housing is a common denominator for all of human mankind. And look, you look at the houseless, I say homeless, but it's houseless situation that exists out there. And yeah, there might be reasons that might be related to mental health, blah, blah, blah. But in some cases, in a lot of cases, that's just, keep in mind, it's amazing how many Americans are maybe one, maybe 3 paychecks away from possibly ending in that situation. And so I think about affordable housing, think about an aging demographic. I think about aging housing, right? So you think about homes that, I mean, I'm old enough that used to be that when you bought a home that was built in the 70s or 80s, you didn't think that was too bad. Well, my goodness, that's now 40, 50 years ago. Yeah. And so those homes have gone through, and even if they've been taken meticulously care of, they're due for pretty large revitalization. And I would argue that in some ways, and this is true in commercial, by the way, is that if you were starting with a blank canvas, what would you build? It would look very different. It would be a smaller home. Where would it be located? Same with the commercial side. And so, I would say real estate, which, by the way, I think of real estate as manufacturing because it's still throughput. Yeah. It still has a cadence to it. So I actually, because I've got a manufacturing background where I started my career, I tend to go, manufacturing. But I think it's real. The answer to your question is real estate.
There's the last statistic I heard, 14,000 people homeless in Arizona at a conference that I just went to. And they said, if somebody who's homeless ends up getting put into jail, it costs $50,000 a year, to the state. If somebody ends up living on the street, they get kicked out of their house, it costs $47,000. And then if they live in a shelter, it's $27,000. And then to keep somebody in their home would cost you $1,600 for the month, right? So it's a big, big issue for sure. So
I think that could be very interesting, by the way, not that we're looking to solve, but hey, for your listeners, we might be giving them some tidbits here. I think it's a great space where it could become very interesting on a public-private partnership that helps solve some of these things. Because to your point, like I said, this is an issue that's going to be around for a long time because keep in mind, we continue growing as I'm going to call it, people talk about population growth. I look at household formation, and household formations are going to continue. So these are, some of you folks that are listening to your show, Dave, they might have millennials that have been living in the house that are finally deciding at the age of 30 they're going to go on their own. That's a household formation. So I think those are very real. And again, the solutions at hand are pretty interesting at times. I came out of my first business in modular. I mean, in some of my businesses, I don't know if that shows that maybe I might not have all the intelligence or all the great intelligence in the world, because most of the industries, I was like 10, maybe 15 years ahead of the curve. But even though we were successful, I think a modular construction, if I was launching a business today, I don't know, it'd be amazing. And we did well, don't get me wrong, but man, it'd be amazing.
Yep, I totally agree. So you came from the Netherlands, you immigrated over as a teenager. So how did that shape your appetite for risk when it comes to your leadership style?
I think there are 2 things in my life that were huge influencers on, I didn't even know it was leadership, but I'm going to call it, I'm going to develop what I call grit, perseverance, and just really deciding that the path forward only happens by going forward. One, I was a relatively sickly child, so I had rheumatic fever, and so I'm in the Netherlands. So it caused me to be very introspective because I spent a lot of time confined to a bed. But then you combine that with making a move to a country that is massive, right? And I speak a language, I speak Dutch and I know English, not in a way that was conversationalist. And so as a result of that, I had to adapt to be able to thrive, right? So first it was just being able to thrive, I call it social acceptance and going through school. But I would say it helped form my ability to problem solve very early on. I had the grit of perseverance because I'm an immigrant, right? I mean, I'm a naturalized citizen, but I'm an immigrant, and understanding, we came here with $1,000, right? We literally, all our belongings fit in an 8-foot by 8-foot crate. And my parents did a wonderful job, so I never even knew that we didn't have any money because you don't know what you don't know. But I say that because it certainly created the foundation of what I came to know as leadership, and that was you just went out and did it. You worked hard, you stayed at it. Some days were better than other days. You just stayed at it. That it was one of those things. It's like people don't realize that water is one of the most powerful forces in nature. And you look at some of the rocks and streams and how they've been polished. That didn't happen overnight. The water just kept at it. Day in, week in, month in, year in, decade in. And so I developed that early on. And then as I started going to school and I started learning what I consider more of the intellectual aspects, now I was putting skill sets to already something that I've been part of, or I viewed how you approached life. And that was just a natural synthesizing of things. And then it was just easy to apply it. I didn't know that I was necessarily a leader until I probably would say a good close to 6 to 8 years in my first company. I really understood that because I always thought that leaders were people that were up on headlines and they were the Steve Jobs and the Bill Gates and the Warren Buffetts of the world. Those were leaders, people that were presidents of the United States, and those were leaders. I just felt like I was providing for my family, and I had developed this business that I felt was going to be a key aspect of being able to provide for my family, never thinking that I was providing leadership. But once I came to understood it, along came with that lots of responsibility.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Refiners fire for sure. And you've been in a lot of different leadership positions.
Yeah.
You've been a leader in YPO.
Yeah.
It's full of high performers. And so from your position, what separates the genuinely fulfilled leaders from the ones who just look successful on paper?
There's a great book, right? The move from success to significance. And I think that is so, so important. I call it, you talked earlier about KPIs, right? The metric, right? Success, I can't really tell you how many people I've met and still know to be all the people in this day that have done well in certain categories, got the nice house, made a lot of money, but then other parts of their life, they've been through 4 divorces, families this fragmented. And so if you think of your life as a wheel on a car, you don't want any flat spots on it because if you have a flat spot, it becomes a rough ride and it becomes susceptible to getting a flat tire. And so, it used to be that people say balanced life. I don't know, I used to use that term. I think it's a dangerous term because people tend to pick things that balance things out and they don't tend to be holistic enough. So they go, I got to make sure that I get enough sleep and I'm healthy and I balance my work. And by the way to balance it is I keep work at work and I keep things are personal at personal. And I go, but God didn't create us to be schizophrenic, right? So I believe that it's important that we're holistic. And I think from that standpoint, I would say what I see, the truly successful people are congruous. And I would say, people talk about things like, integrity. And then I think to me, that's integral living, right? People, I call it, they pick, especially in this day of social media and Instagram, kind of what I call it sound bites, just because someone is honest, not the only thing that causes integrity. It's being able to be honest externally and internally, right? Are the things that you said earlier about vanity, right? Are the things that outwardly say, well, look, I've been successful and I've made a lot of money, but internally, I don't give any of it away. Right? I don't share with anybody else, and that's incongruous. And so the really successful people I think, have that kind of integrated living. And I think certainly I aspire to it, and I'll be the first to admit that some days I do better than other days, but I never, it's back to the other question. I chip away at it every day. And then the last thing I'll say is the John Maxwell book, right? Fail forward, right? So it's in football, they tell you, not that I don't want you to think I'm a football player in any means, but one of the things I do remember is if you get tackled, fall forward,
Fall
because
forward.
you're going to at least gain an extra yard, right? So always fail forward, fall forward.
100% agree with that. And so in these, fast-paced environments that you're working in, you deal with a lot of different personalities and a lot of things coming at you all the time. That's one of the biggest challenges, I think, for leaders is you just have tons of noise thrown at you. And so how do you filter out the noise and decide what really matters? I always say, John Maxwell actually said the same thing. He said, you don't manage time, you just manage priorities. Time just passes by. And so how do you go about filtering through the noise and just deciding like that matters the most, and that's how I'm going to go that direction today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, it's a question that we should all ask ourselves every single day. Here's what I would say. It's kind of like a car dashboard. The car has 10,000 critical things going on in it that if any of those things stop, all of a sudden brakes don't work, perhaps the car doesn't run. Trust me, there's not 10,000 things on your dashboard to pay attention to, but there are some very key ones, fuel being one of them, speed, right? Things like that. I think it's super important. I think it takes a lot of introspection to understand what are the things that really move the needle in your journey. And I say journey because, again, if you just say business and that's going to be the only metric, then I would argue and say, well, look, anytime that there's a gain, there's a loss. The question is, what is being sacrificed? And if you're not holistic about it, that's how all of a sudden you've left a family behind. All of a sudden you no longer have a wife that, you've got children that aren't talking to you. You can have business partners that you've alienated. And so I think it's super important to have to be very introspective. Again, I shared with you, because I developed that introspection at such a young age. I think that's important. Also understanding, I would think, the landscape. I'm not talking about the noise, right? I always go, if you think about it, you look at a football game, there's lots of noise, but the first thing you need to size up is where's the ball and how far away is the end zone, and then bring all the parts and pieces. And I think, to me, having that perspective and sizing up that quickly and saying, well, look, here, what are we looking to achieve? And starting from there and then allowing the other things to connect into. Because otherwise, we're like firemen. We just respond to whatever makes the greatest noise. Such and such a customer is upset, right? And by the way, I'm not here to minimize that, but just know if you're spending time on that, that means you're not spending time on something else. And then that customer that's upset could be yet more upset a week from now because the thing you were working on is going to make it more problematic for that customer.
Tyranny of the urgent. So if someone was just a fly on the wall and they were shadowing you for a week, what would they be most surprised to learn about how you operate?
I think they'll find that and this is, again, my introspection. They'll find, I spend a lot of time in meetings and conversations and very extroverted. What they'll be surprised at is I do what it's called a lot of training, a lot of preparation to be ready for the game. I'm a long-time triathlete, right, since the age of 26. And every day I'm swimming 2,000 meters and I'm running or cycling. And because time, you said it well, right, it's one of the things that we haven't solved is how to create more time. And so I'm constantly, if I'm going to spend that much time, what are some things I could be doing, right, that are allowing me to get prepared for the game of that day? So I'm listening to podcasts. Perhaps I'm listening to things that allow me to get right in my mind. What people will be surprised is how I go really deep in my introspection. I journal. I spend a lot of time specifically with the idea that I'm going to give myself throughout the day. And so I need to be prepared to do that, to put myself in the best state of mind. Not just tell myself a state of mind, is really flushing those things out, making sure that I know that there's some things going to happen per plan. There's going to be some things that happen that are a little bit out of plan, and there's some things that I didn't plan for. And if I'm not prepared for that, right? How do you prepare for something that you don't know what's going to happen? I always tell people, well, look, if a calamity happens that you didn't plan for, if you got some money in the bank, okay, you can kind of figure it out. If something happens that might be health related, if you're reasonably healthy, you might be able to overcome that just the fact that you don't have underlying issues beyond that, right? So for me, though, what I was surprised by is how much time I spend in, I would say, feeding myself, not just traditional food and drink, but feeding myself with the idea that I need to make sure that I'm nourished to be able to help people, to be able to be the best version of me.
That's good. They're good advice. So a lot of success you've had in your career. What's something you're still insecure about in business or life?
It's a great question. As I've gotten older, I've gotten less insecure about a lot of things. Here's what I would say. I'm a man of faith, right? So for me, it's love God, love people. We all want to be loved. Certainly, some days I feel this is going to sound a little bit of pity party. I've got an insecurity, I would say, of feeling unappreciated. Not because I need the appreciation, but I would say I do struggle with that. And by the way, for me, it is super simple. That's enough. That's all I need to know. Just the acknowledgement that I know, oh my goodness, they paid attention to it. So I think unappreciated, I think not because I'm looking for those accolades, but I think it feeds into the insecurity saying, well, the thing that I'm doing, maybe I'm doing it wrong. The thing that I'm doing, maybe I got the wrong priority. So where I'm coming from, my perspective really comes from the fact that if I don't sense that appreciation, then I might be on the wrong track, which then feeds into insecurity.
It's good. It's amazing what those simple little things of thankfulness can do or not do. And it's easy to take that for granted too.
And to that point, just as a follow-up to that, I got to tell you, in many ways, I prefer not to have the big accolades because to me, they feel almost, I hate to say artificial because I don't want to minimize them. But I want it to be, you said something early on, I think that's spot on, right? It's not just genuine. It's got to feel for me very organic. I think if someone said to me, like I've had people call me, I've had someone call me, text me recently saying, look, I just appreciate you being in my life. That was it. And that might, that's like someone just giving me a shot of, it's
big
like,
deal.
It's huge. It's huge. And to me, to your point, it's the simple things, right? I would say, right? Keep it simple, stupid. Those little things, they go, well, for me, but I think for a lot of people, go a long way.
Long way. The underappreciated leave your place real fast. So advice, we get lots of it throughout the day and throughout our life. So what's the worst advice you've ever received about building wealth or running a company? And what did it teach you?
My first company I took, this is pre-Sarbanes-Oxley, I took it public on NASDAQ. When I discovered at the age of 29 that banks are not in the business of lending, they're in the business, especially growth companies. I would say I would say bad advice, but advice there are two things. One, advice I didn't understand, which is I then had to go raise capital, which I needed significant capital. And back in those days, this back in the 90s, private equity didn't exist. When I was venturing into a place I did not understand. And so I was hearing things from very smart people that ultimately ended up leveraging the company pretty significantly. In fact, I would say that we went public because that's the only choice we had. And I look back on it, you should never be, remember I said earlier, right? You start out with plan A and you end up doing plan D. But there are some cases where you might only have one plan, and that can be problematic. So I would say the advice of going down that route with fully understanding that, I think that was, again, it worked out great, worked out fine. But I would say that today, there's a couple things I pay attention to. Whatever is the great idea, great strategy, I say, fantastic. Let's put that up on the board, call that plan A. Hey, let's talk about plan B. And I think there's no conversation that I have now where I'm not exploring those things because sometimes they help amplify plan A. Meaning it validates it further. Or in some cases, you might kind of, we have a good friend in common, right? Talk about blind corners, right? John Waters.
Yep.
And I think me, it's eliminating, being able to look around those corners. It's part of what CEO does is be able to look around those corners. So I would say that. I think the other thing that I got, and I would say, used to tell me, hey, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's not that it's bad advice. It's not the reality of things. Trust me, sometimes, this sounds terrible, there are days that, trust me, sometimes it's like, oh my goodness, this killing me is better than what I had to face with.
Yeah.
Often death comes to what I call 1,000 paper cuts. Yeah. And so I think it's really so it goes back to, I would say the advice that I make sure that I have an internal group of people. By the way, not just people that are board of directors, board of advisors, people that will talk openly and honestly with me with one purpose, and that is because they care for me. And I will tell you, if you ever sit in a room and you look around, size that up. Doesn't mean that you need to kick people out of the room, but just
Sure.
29, 30 years old, and I'm sitting around this table with all these hedge fund guys and bank syndicates. I'm looking around, all these people they're smiling, everyone's going fantastic. When I look back on it, I couldn't count any friends in there, right? There are no friends in there because keep in mind, those people, they'll all toast the bubbly when times are good. Those are also the same people that'll have you have a public hanging if things don't go well.
Oh, yeah.
So someone explained to me early on, and I would tell my younger self, make sure you always have an inner group, trusted people, which is not easy to gain because trust me, that inner group often won't be family members because family members might not know what your business you're in. They might not have the background. Yeah. In some cases, they might know you too well. They might know your history as a child, and they'll go, I can't begin to tell you. There are people that when I started my business, they're like, you're crazy. You don't know how to do it. By the way, those were my family members were telling me that. People that loved and cared for me.
Oh, yeah, of course.
They're like, no, you're an immigrant. You came here 1,000. Don't do this. Don't make that mistake. So anyway, that would be my feedback.
That's good. Yeah, 10,000 hours, they say, and I always say it's 10,000 iterations as well. There's so much. So we've changed our mind a lot throughout the years. Things don't go as planned. And so what have you changed your mind in the last 5 years, especially when it comes to scaling business or investing in particular?
A great question. I renew my mind every single day, Dave. And I say that because the question, and it's a very thoughtful question, I've come to understand specifically in this last decade in running companies and leading companies, that when you end up changing your mind, and again, I'm going to be a little bit broad brushed about this, but when you change your mind, you change your strategy, you change your viewpoint on how to scale a business, that tells me that you haven't done iterations in between. At least for me, I haven't done iterations leading up to it. As I think about that question, I would say really understand. Again, it's kind of a little bit back to what I said earlier. I think the people part, the human capital is super important. I think for me, it's kind of what I said a few minutes ago, which is I kind of want to challenge my own ideas, meaning that if I come up with an idea, I then go, okay, terrific, put a pin in it. Now let's kick the crap out of it, because let's assume that I'm wrong, right? Like to me, that should get tested out, kind of test kitchen out before it goes to prime time, right? And so I change my mind a lot. Actually, I would say differently. I do lots of iterations, right? I think the course for success, and when I say success, in being able to overcome, like whatever that looks, overcome a challenge, overcome to the next, whatever, taking the business to the next level, whatever that might be. I think that path is a jig-jag like this. And then from 10,000 feet, that looks like a straight line, but it isn't. And I think it's a constant, it's kind of like the GPS. I think, we all have a love-hate relationship with GPS. It tells us to go down this is a street, and we go, oh, we know better. And so it'll reroute, right? It'll continue rerouting, but it's like, it's really over here. It continues kind of you in that right path. And I think that process is super important. I would say, I would say it slightly differently on what I do. It's not so much globally changing my mind, but I'm constantly doing reiteration of my thinking.
It's good. It's a good thing to be renewing your mind daily and testing your own ideas, because sometimes we're our own blind spot.
Yeah, it's so easy, by the way, Dave, for us, especially when things are going well. I think our flesh nature is we like to be comfortable. It's the reason why we like living in a beautiful home, have a nice, comfortable car. It's easy for our flesh to kind of settle in on that. And I think we kind of have to feel the tension. And again, there's so many things, right? Flywheel is really about tension, right? There has to be this tension that really create that momentum. And I think that's super important. And so that iteration, renewing a mind, that constant, there's a very fine line between questioning yourself and kind of saying, well, look, let's say I'm right, and then park it, but then also say, let's pretend I'm wrong. Where could I be wrong? What could that create? And really kind of continue creating that tension, that thinking. It's that same thing that people say, well, look, part of it, worry, right? It's like something like 80%, I'm going to get this wrong, but I'm going to say 80% plus of the things we worry about never happens, right? But we spend a lot of brain energy on it. And so sometimes if we just took time and kind of say, well, look, let's pretend that I'm right. What is the worst case scenario? Go through that, put a pin in it. Now let's start working on things that, because the more likelihood of that happening is much slimmer than these other things that could be happening, and focus on those.
I keep a book, it's called Head Trash, that I've kept for years. One time, years ago, I decided to go through and say, how many of those came true? And so I walked through every single one of them, and it was 0%. So it was really fascinating to go through and go, wow, over years and years of worry, none of them came true. So we do have a little bit of delusion in our own mind, or false prophets, as they say.
Yep. Very
So
well
as
said.
this has been a great conversation. And as we wrap up, I guess, what's one belief or value that guides you no matter what? And how has it shown up in the toughest moments in your journey?
Yeah, boy, that's a deep question. I mean, look, it's a hard question to answer, but then an easy question to answer. Look, we all need a true north. That's, first of all, if we don't have that, and this goes back for that, if we don't have a true north, in seafaring, that's how you get lost in open oceans, right? Like if you don't know where the North Star is. And for me, I'm a man of faith, right? So my faith life is super important. And by the way, part of that is really picking a North Star that is dependable and isn't going to change, right? One reason why the North Star was picked, because the North Star is never going to become the South Star, never become the East Star or the West Star. And so I think often, on one hand, we pretty quick on taking our goals and we're quick on making those really lofty. But I think in many ways we kind of go, I would say we kind of hit the low bar when the North Star we pick. So I'll give an example. Someone says, well, my North Star is to have X number of dollars in the bank. And I go, the first thing I say is, well, how do you know that amount of money is going to be sufficient enough? Oh, well, by the way, the bank you're going to put in, how do you know that bank's going to be around? That all of a sudden dollars aren't going to matter 20 years from now, but it's going to be, we saw live cryptocurrency, whatever that might be, right? Yeah. And so that doesn't mean that it can't be a subset, but it needs to be a subset to a North Star. And so I've come to really understand it. It's also the place that, back to the early part of the conversation, I think the introspection becomes really important, right? I mean, we should all ask ourselves, why are we here? Yeah. Why are we here? And some could argue, oh my goodness, my mom and dad got together and they had a terrific night and here I am. That could be the case, but that seems like a crappy way to think of life, right? There's got to be a bigger purpose. Well, is the purpose just for me to go out and build a business? Okay, terrific. Well, you know what? There's a whole history. There's a whole history of business. The S&P 500 has been reshuffled from the days of the Industrial Revolution, going into the information age and on what I consider to the artificial intelligence age. It'll continue reshuffling. So I go, that's going to change. So being able to have this sifting sand, maybe in some cases quicksand, you don't have a true north. I think that's a tough way to go through life. And I always tell people, I've had people say, well, what if it turns out that, in my case, it's Jesus, if that turns out to be wrong? And I go, well, you know what? If it's wrong, it's a pretty good North Star. And even if it turns out that all of that turns out to be a bunch of malarkey, it's probably the only thing that has stayed consistent for thousands of years. So at the very least, it's a pretty good way to get a plumb line to my life.
A mathematical equation that usually ends up in success. So Patrick Vanden Bossche, it was a wonderful conversation, and I'm super, super grateful to have you on here and to have you in my life. So thanks for being on the show today.
Oh my God. Thanks for inviting me. I enjoyed it. Look, if I'm able to help somebody, first of all, it's always a pleasure to spend time with you, Dave. So it's always an easy yes. But if this helps any of your listeners, awesome. So look, any way I can help, fantastic. And all of you out there, I wish you nothing but the best. And there is a best for you out there. So even if things are not going terrific, just know there's a best out there for you.
Sounds great. Thanks, my friend.